Most people live as if they are managing an endless list of pursuits: work, relationships, accumulation, status, entertainment. And somewhere in that chaos, there's a question that never quite gets asked. What are you actually seeking? This isn't about judgment. This is about honesty, because the way you spend your time, your money, your mental energy reveals something that conversations alone never will. It reveals your actual priority structure, not the one you claim to have. And if you've grown up in or around faith, there's a specific pursuit that gets named constantly, but practiced almost never: seeking the Lord. What does that even mean? Not the surface-level answer, the real one. Most people assume seeking is something only relevant for new believers or for those in crisis. You convert, you believe, and then the seeking part is done. You're checked in, you move on. But there's something in Scripture that keeps circling back to this language, and once you see it, it changes how you read almost everything else. Pay attention to this part. Think about how you actually know what someone values. You don't ask them. You watch. Where does their money move? What gets their focused time when nobody's watching? Which relationships get real energy versus surface maintenance? The answers to those questions don't lie. They show the actual operating system underneath whatever someone claims to prioritize. This is the part nobody notices. People don't usually think they're prioritizing wrongly. They think they're balancing. They think they're being practical. They think they're handling what has to be handled and fitting other things in around it. But the math of time and attention doesn't actually balance that. Way attention flows toward what you've decided matters most. And if you've decided something matters most, you'll notice it everywhere. In Psalm 105, there's a cluster of verbs that describe how to orient yourself toward God. Not just belief, action, give thanks, call upon Him, make known His deeds, sing, speak glory, seek. The structure of that verse suggests these aren't separate activities. They're different angles on the same reorientation. They're what it looks like when someone has reorganized their attention. Here's where it gets real. Many people encounter that word, seek, in Scripture, and immediately create a category for it that doesn't quite fit. They think it means you're looking for something you've lost. You misplaced God. Now you're searching. But that's not what's happening in the text. Seeking the Lord is about recovery. It's about deepening. It's about what happens after you've already encountered Him, made the initial commitment, and now the question becomes, how intimate does this relationship actually get? That shift matters more than it seems. When someone asks you why you'd keep seeking if you already have faith, the honest answer exposes something. It shows that faith in common practice often means the bare minimum. I've made the commitment, I believe the right things, I check the boxes when I need to. But seeking suggests something else entirely. It suggests active desire. It suggests you want to know someone better, not just maintain a distant agreement that they exist. Deepening intimacy with the divine equals organizing your entire life around proximity to God's direction. Consider what deepening actually requires in any relationship. It requires time that isn't competing with other time. It requires attention that isn't divided. It requires vulnerability, which means you're willing to be shaped by what you learn. Most people's approach to faith doesn't include that level of intentionality. It includes Sunday mornings, maybe some prayer when fear spikes, gratitude when things work out. But the word seek in Scripture keeps implying something more deliberate. There's something that happens when you start paying attention to the pattern in the Old Testament especially. Seeking God is framed as both urgent and ongoing, not a sprint, not a checklist item, an orientation. The language suggests that the closer you get, the more you realize how much deeper it goes. This is where it gets interesting. People sometimes assume that spiritual growth follows a curve, where the closer you get, the more you understand, and eventually you reach something like mastery or arrival. But the actual testimony in Scripture goes a different direction. The more someone encounters the actual nature of who God is, the more they become aware of how vast that is. The more satisfied they become in what they're discovering, the more dissatisfied they become with their own understanding of it. It creates this unusual dynamic where spiritual growth doesn't feel like a rival. It feels like the horizon keeps moving, and most people stop seeking because that's exhausting. You want to arrive somewhere, but notice what that does. If you stop seeking, you stop learning, you stop adjusting, you stop allowing what you're discovering to reshape how you operate. You calcify, and in the Christian framework, that calcification has a name. It's called a hardened heart. It's not dramatic. It's just the natural outcome of deciding you know enough and closing the door to deeper knowing. This is the part that changes everything. The urgency in Scripture around seeking God isn't really directed at people who are actively engaged. It's directed at people who are drifting, delaying, assuming there's always more time. And there's a finality in some of that language that's worth sitting with. While he may be found while he is near. These aren't gentle suggestions. They're acknowledging something uncomfortable. Not everyone will seek. Not everyone will find. There are consequences to the path you don't take. For someone outside faith, the stakes are described in stark terms. Sin separates. It puts distance between you and God. That distance isn't poetic. It has real implications. It shapes how you understand yourself, how you make decisions, how you treat others, what you build your life toward. And the longer you live in that separation, the more normalized it becomes. Your conscience develops calluses. You stop hearing the signal. You convince yourself you're fine. But here's what Scripture suggests happens underneath wrath. Is accumulating not in a theatrical sense, in a logical sense. If you've built your life in opposition to how reality actually works, then at some point, collision is inevitable. Consequences aren't punishment handed down arbitrarily. They're the natural result of organizing yourself against truth. And the real horror of that in the Christian understanding isn't just earthly consequence. It's the idea of permanence, death, spiritual death, where you're separated from God, not just in this life, but perpetually. Eternal consequences. Most people don't want to think about that. It's uncomfortable. It feels like fear-mongering. But from the text perspective, urgency about the stakes isn't cruel. It's loving. If you actually cared about someone, and you knew they were heading towards something harmful, wouldn't you tell them? Wouldn't you keep telling them until they heard? This is where it gets complex for people who are already believers. Because for someone within faith, the message isn't about urgency of initial salvation. It's about urgency of ongoing transformation. And the text suggests that God, in predestining believers, had something specific in mind, conformity to Christ's image. Not just that you believe right, that you become right, that you're shaped into the likeness of who you're seeking. That requires something from you. It requires your wholehearted commitment. And wholehearted is a specific word. It doesn't mean enthusiastic about faith when you feel like it. It means has first, genuinely first, not competed for with your career, your social position, your comfort, your entertainment, your convenience, has the priority that reorganizes how you relate to everything else. Most people's version of faith doesn't include that. Here's the practical mechanics. When you decide something's genuinely a priority, you seek it diligently. Diligently doesn't mean you think about it occasionally, when circumstances force the question. It means it becomes a regular orientation. You're consulting him, you're asking, you're listening for direction, not just praying when you have urgent needs. You're making decisions with reference to what you believe he wants, not decisions you've already made that you then ask him to bless. And beyond diligently comes continually. Not sometimes, not when it's convenient or when you feel spiritual. All the time, in all your decisions, on small matters and large ones. Which job offer, which relationship, what you spend money on, what you do with your free time, how you handle conflict, what you believe, how you speak about others. The entire texture of your daily existence becomes something you're bringing to him, asking about, adjusting, based on what you're learning. That's where most people hit friction, because it requires humility. It requires acknowledging that you don't have the wisdom for your own life, that your instincts, your preferences, your assumptions about what you need and what's good. These might not be reliable, that the pride that keeps you defending your own plans, your own reputation, your own understanding, that's not your friend. It's the thing preventing you from receiving something better. Most people experience humility as loss. You have to admit you were wrong. You have to change direction. You have to accept that what you wanted wasn't actually what you needed. Swallowing pride requires accepting that 90% of what you thought was right was incomplete. Results vary based on how honest you can be with yourself. But here's what actually happens. Confidence emerges from the opposite direction. When you align yourself with something larger and more true than your own thinking, when you stop defending the weaker position and start asking the deeper questions, something shifts. Your alarm system adjusts. You start noticing when you're heading in a direction that doesn't actually serve your own deepest good. You develop sensitivity to it. It becomes almost impossible to ignore. Some people describe this as God's voice getting clearer, conscience getting louder, discernment developing. But from a systems perspective, what's happening is you're tuning your receiving apparatus to a signal that was always there. You're decreasing noise. You're organizing your attention differently. And once you do, patterns become visible. Let's slow down here. Notice what seeking does to the seeker. It's not passive. It activates something. It reorganizes your time, your thoughts, your choices. It makes things matter in new ways. Things that felt urgent become less so. Things you dismissed become central. Relationships shift. Habits shift. The trajectory of your life begins to bend. And most people won't do this. Most people will read that description and feel the weight of it and decide it's too much. They'll choose the lighter version, the version where they're Christian but not rigorously Christian. They believe but not urgently. They're part of the system but not transformed by it. And what Scripture keeps suggesting is that this in-between place is unstable. It's not actually a sustainable position. You're either seeking or you're drifting, and drifting just looks slower. This is the part people overlook what you don't choose. You're still choosing by default. If you don't actively prioritize seeking God, you're actively prioritizing everything else. The distraction is something that happens to you. It's something that succeeds because you didn't defend against it. Your attention, your time, your money, your energy, they flow toward whatever you've decided matters. If God isn't in that decision, He's not in the priority structure. But here's what changes when someone actually does this work. When they begin seeking with real intention, when they start consulting Scripture, not as a rule book for behavior, but as a guide for thinking. When they begin organizing their life around proximity to God's direction rather than distance from God's judgment, something happens to fear. It reorganizes. Most people live with background anxiety. It's low-level but constant uncertainty about whether they're making good choices. Fear that they'll run out of resources. Anxiety about their reputation, their security. What people think when you externalize that control. When you genuinely hand over the question of direction to something you believe is wiser than you. The anxiety doesn't disappear, but it shifts. You're not responsible for figuring it all out anymore. You're responsible for listening and responding to what you hear. Exercise differently. You're not controlling outcomes. You're controlling your orientation, your openness, your willingness to be redirected, and that actually produces better outcomes consistently across time. Better decisions, takes better listening, takes better alignment, equal sign compounded stability over years. Abandoned, whether circumstances improve rapidly or improve over decades. The seeking itself, the alignment itself, the willingness to be shaped itself, these are what produce transformation. Not the feeling, not the outcome verification, the actual decision to reorganize yourself around something true. Is true, even when circumstances don't immediately prove it. especially when circumstances don't immediately prove it. Because if alignment only worked when it felt good, everyone would do it. The actual test is whether you'll keep seeking, keep asking, keep listening, when the immediate payoff isn't obvious.